Hello everybody, this is Mr. Larson. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Taiping Rebellion. Make sure you got your Cornell notes out and everything like that. So we got to start this off with a guy named Hong Sichuan. And I know his name is a little tricky with a lot of X's and Q's, but make sure that you can pronounce that. It is going to be important, especially when we have graded debates and graded discussions. You want to sound intelligent, so make sure you know your Chinese X's and Q's and letters like that. I do have a worksheet that'll help you if you have a hard time pronouncing those. So anyway, we've got Hong Sichuan. He's the main character of our lesson today, and he would probably call himself Tianwang, or the Heavenly King. Reason being is he said he was going to be a new king in China. Eventually he proclaimed himself an emperor. He did not only live from 1851 to 1864, would have made him, 14 years old when he died. This is the dates that he was the Heavenly King, or as long as his kingdom lasted. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. This is Hong Sichuan. This is the image you'll see if you do a Google Images search on him. It's basically the only drawing that we have of him. The important thing to know about him is that he was a Hakka minority. He was a member of the Hakka group, ethnic group. Remember, the Hakka are Han. We have talked about them a little bit. They're a subgroup of Han, and they move around China a lot. They're often persecuted. They're sort of a lower level of Han, and they're often treated pretty poorly by other Han Chinese. But at least they were Han. They weren't Manchu, who controlled the Qing dynasty at the time. He came from a middle-class family. Middle class is sort of a weird way to say it. There really wasn't a middle class, but he was a little richer than the other people around him. He had enough money that his parents could send him through school, and he could eventually try to take what are called the civil service exams. And it was a really, really big deal. He qualified for the civil service exams. He took some pre-tests and filled some other requirements. And he also had enough money to travel to the cities in which the civil service exams were taken, one of which was Canton, and that's where he went. So it was a really big deal. When you qualify for the civil service exams in China, that means you could be part of the government. You could have a job with the government. You can make a ton of money. Lin Zexu, for example, had passed the civil service exams and then moved up the government. He became really rich and powerful and famous. So as soon as he qualified, it was a big deal. Everyone in his village knew that he was doing this, and it could change all of their lives if he passed. So very, very high stakes test. Now, the civil service exams were really hard. Less than 5% of people passed them. And there were things like science, what science they had, and math, and I think astronomy and things like that. But the majority of this test is going to be the Confucian classics. You've got to know the Analects, you've got to know everything Confucius and Mencius wrote, and you've got to be a good Confucian. The idea being that a good Confucian is a good civil servant or good leader of China. And it was a system that worked pretty well. But this test is really, really intense. You can sort of see this picture over here. This is a model of the cells, they called them, that the civil service exams took place in. They are sort of like jail cells. They're very small. And when the civil service exam begins, you are locked in there and you are not leaving for 3 days. Unless you die, you do not leave for 3 days. The test takes 3 days. You can see this guy in the second half, he's moved his bench down a little bit so that he could take a nap. You probably have to sleep if you're going to be there in 3 days. The other thing you'll notice is buckets. They've got buckets because you cannot take a bathroom break. So it can get pretty smelly in there by day 3, I'm sure. They've got candles, they've got their pens, and they usually bring enough food to last them for 3 days, and they don't eat very much. So talk about a crazy high-stress test. It's a big, big deal. And if you pass, like I said, you can be rich and famous and powerful. And if you fail, you go back to being a poor farmer or whoever you were. So this is a big, big deal. Hong Sichuan failed his first time. Not unusual. His second time, he was getting a little nervous. His family and his parents had to keep paying for him to go to Canton and had to requalify him. By the third time, he was just devastated. And by the fourth time, they say he got back to his village and he didn't speak to anyone and he just collapsed into bed. And they said he was white as a ghost and he was shaking. So really, really bad. The fourth time he passed, he was feeling pretty terrible. This sounds sort of crazy. It doesn't even sound like something that's real, but this is a weird thing that happened to Hong Sichuan. When he got sick, after maybe having a mental breakdown after failing so many times, and his parents probably didn't have enough money to send him back for a fifth time, he started having visions. He would go into these trances and he would have visions and dreams, and he would tell people about them afterwards, but people said he really wasn't the same afterwards. In these visions, it's weird, he saw a giant man, very large, with golden hair, gold like the mineral, not like blonde. And this man gave him a sword, and this giant man said his job was to go through China and kill all the devils. And he had this dream again and again. He also had a dream. In the dream, he met another man who was smaller, who was about his size, who called him Didi and told him again he must kill all the demons. Now, if you know a little Chinese, you might know that Didi is how you say little brother. So he said, whoever this man is who's telling me to kill the demons, the smaller guy, he must be my older brother. Now, eventually, Hang Shichuan went through his stuff that he had collected in Guangzhou when he was down there taking the civil service exam. And one of the things he found was a biblical tract, like a little pamphlet that a missionary had given him in Guangzhou. You've got to remember Guangzhou is one of the 5 treaty ports in the Treaty of Nanking, so there were foreigners in there and they could do basically what they wanted. They only had to follow British law. So he had received this tract. He really hadn't read it very much, but he read it again, and he realized as he read it again that his dreams were connected to this tract. He decided this guy, that the giant man who gave me the sword with the golden hair, that must be God. And the younger man who called me Didi must be Jesus. He put it all together, and then he realized, oh my gosh, I am the younger brother of Jesus Christ, and God is my father. So he had this huge dream and imagined that he was something amazing. Anyway, he realized he had to spread the message. Now, you might guess who the demons are that were in his dreams, who he thought he had to kill. And if you guessed the foreigners, you're actually wrong. He actually thought that the foreigners might be able to help him on his mission. The demons were the Manchus, and he believed that it was his mission to start a new kingdom called the Taiping, and this great kingdom would be a new Han dynasty that would take over, getting rid of the Manchus. So he knew he had to create the heavenly kingdom of great peace. You can see in this picture he's got a sword and he's got this nice silk shirt that shows a lot of interesting things. He actually had a sword made. I think it would have been really cool if he would have woken up from his dream and had the sword in his hand, but that's not how it happened. It's not a movie. He had a sword made. But people did start believing him, and they did follow him, and he started collecting a lot of followers. He believed that he was going to create this kingdom, and that his goal, the goal of the kingdom, was to get rid of the Manchus who had started the Qing dynasty. He said, it's their fault. Those are the demons in my dreams, and they're the ones who took over China and allowed us to get beaten in the Opium Wars, forced us to sign the Treaty of Nanking, which humiliated us. He said, what we need to do is we need to overthrow the Qing dynasty and a new dynasty based on Christianity, equality, and shared property has to come up. Now, one thing to note, most people in China don't even know really what Christianity is about, have maybe heard about it a little bit, but it's a very new idea. And equality is really not something you see in the Confucian tradition very much. Everybody has their place on the pyramid. Everybody knows who's above them, who's below them. So this is a brand new sort of idea. Even gender equality. Men and women are supposed to be equal in the Taiping or the Heavenly Kingdom. And the last part is way ahead of its time, the idea of shared property. People in this kingdom were to give up all their land and give up all their money and give everything to the government, which is basically him, and then they redistributed the wealth. They gave people food, they gave people a place to live. This is way before communism in Russia. In fact, Karl Marx is around, and Karl Marx actually heard about this. He's an early communist thinker, but they had no connection between the two. So it's sort of strange that this popped up, very much like communism. So the Taiping, this is sort of what the kingdom was like. It grew larger and larger, and a lot of people joined. Basically, the rules of the Taiping kingdom are the 10 Commandments. And there's a very Christian type organization. Now, before I go any further, I've got to give you a warning. When I talk about this and when I criticize this, it was a Christian organization, it was a Christian kingdom, but it's not going to be Christianity like you know if you're a Christian and you go to church and you go to Bible study. It was sort of a warped version, a different version, based on his thinking. So if I do criticize Christianity, I'm not criticizing people who are Christian. I'm criticizing this version of Christianity, and it was sort of strange. You'll see in a minute what I mean. So basically, Christianity replaces Confucianism, even the civil service exams. His kingdom, which was a kingdom within the China now, the Qing still controlled most of China. In his kingdom, you didn't have civil service exams studying Confucianism, you had civil service exams studying his writings and studying the Bible. And even women could take the civil service exams, by the way. The armies of the Taiping Kingdom were fanatical. They really believed that they were doing right, that they were killing demons and doing God's work. And they could usually beat the Qing armies if the Qing tried to stop them. Even women could be in the armies, although the genders were always segregated. Women had their own units, men had their own units. In this image you can see this is a Taiping church service. They had them on Thursdays due to a miscalculation when they looked at the Chinese calendar and the Western calendar. So they had their church services on Thursdays. You can see all the men are on one side, all the women are on the other side. They're very serious about stuff like that. Land and wealth was shared. When you showed up in a Taiping village, somebody would come collect all the money and everything you own, and then they would make sure you were fed and everything like that. No alcohol, no opium, no prostitution. Genders were separated. If you're not married to a woman, you're probably not going to spend much time with her at all, and vice versa. Men and women are strictly separated in almost everything. And finally, the last thing that's sort of scary is when they did take over a new village or a new town, they would take the Manchu leaders from the Qing dynasty and they would execute them, usually with decapitation, sometimes with crucifixion, hanging them on crosses. Everybody else in the city, in the village, had to join the Taiping. They really didn't have a choice, and a lot of them sort of went along. So here's this new kingdom that continues to grow. So this sounds a little crazy. It sounds a little weird, and most Chinese didn't even know about Christianity at the time. So why would anybody join here? The interesting thing about it is that at this time, Chinese were extremely poor. There'd been a series of natural disasters, droughts. They were humiliated by losing the Opium War and being dominated. After thinking they're the center of the world for 2,000 years, suddenly Westerners come in and humiliate them. So a lot of peasants felt like they needed to try something different. What China was doing wasn't working. It also appealed to minorities, especially Hakka. A lot of Hakka minority people rushed to the Taiping Kingdom, and a lot of women believed that they could be equal and they could have more rights within this kingdom. So a lot of people who were oppressed at the time thought that this was an opportunity, sort of a utopia. The other thing is there's a lot of new Western ideas sort of trickling into China through the treaty ports of the Treaty of Nanking. Ideas like equality and democracy and republics and things like that, things that are relatively new to China. And a lot of people thought that the Taiping embodied those ideas and they were going to go live in a free, egalitarian utopia. The last two are really the things that really drew the most people. Even if you don't care a bit about religion or equality or government or anything, most Han really hated the Manchus and they saw them as foreign conquerors, which they were. They were a foreign group controlling China. So most people really hated the Manchus, especially Han Chinese, and they joined because they thought this is the way to get rid of the Manchus and to reclaim China, like we had in the Ming Dynasty. And the last part, we always underestimate this, but a lot of people were just sort of caught in the middle. If your village or your city was taken over by the Taiping, you went along with them, especially if you saw them executing your Qing leaders, your Manchu leaders, and they asked, who's with the Qing, who's supporting them. You're not going to say anything. You're probably just going to go along with this and do what they do. This is true all over the world. When people say, like recently, they're saying we should just bomb ISIS, bomb them to death. You're forgetting that a lot of people are there against their own will and they're just sort of caught in the middle. So a lot of people were just forced. All right, I'm going to take a quick break and read this passage. This is an example passage from Hong Shichuan's Bible. He took the Christian Bible, or the parts of it that he had access to. He really didn't have a very good understanding of Christianity, and he had interpreted it through sometimes multiple layers of interpretation, but this is the kinds of things he added to the Bible to make the Taiping Bible. So imagine if you go to Bible school, imagine if you turn the page and you saw this verse in the Bible added in. Hong Shichuan says, "Can the Chinese still consider themselves men? Ever since the Manchus poisoned China, the flame of oppression has risen up to heaven. The poison of corruption has defiled the emperor's throne. The influence of the demons has distressed the empire, while the Chinese, with bowed heads and dejected spirits, willingly became subjects and servants." So very hateful language, strong, but it also appeals to the Chinese sense of dignity. their sense of heaven. Remember, we talked about the mandate of heaven. So you can see it sort of mixes Chinese ideology with Christian ideology, and he sort of makes his own thing here. Finally, this image is good, especially if we do image analysis on the test in the future. This is an image that shows the Manchu trying to take back one of the Taiping cities, and you can see it's just deadly. There are bodies in the river, there's people running everywhere, they're burning down homes. This is what we call total war. If you know you're going to lose a city, you burn it completely down. You sow salt in your fields and you kill all your animals as you're leaving. This was an extremely destructive war. You can see in the left-hand corner, these are little Manchu flags. The Manchu flag is really cool, by the way. Google it sometime. It's got a cool dragon on it. And this is the Taiping inside. And you can see lots and lots of people dying. That's why 20 to 30 million people died in this conflict. It's a huge, deadly conflict. All right, so only a few more slides here. The height of the Taiping controlled at one point about 1/4 of China's land and about 1/4 of China's population. And that's a lot. China's a huge, huge place. And the other thing is it lasted 16 years. This is a long rebellion. Most rebellions don't last 6 years before they're put down. Basically, the Qing had a hard time stamping out this rebellion and getting rid of it because they were also fighting the British and the French in the Second Opium War, and they were worried about the Japanese taking over Korea, which had been traditionally a tributary state of China. So the Qing had other things going on, and they had a hard time putting down this rebellion. At their height, the Taiping controlled, as I said, about 1/4 of the land and 1/4 of the people of China, mostly in southern China down here. You can see this is modern-day Beijing. They call it Peking at the time. And their capital was in Nanking, which is right in the middle. And Nanking is still an important city. It will be. We're going to talk about it a lot in future lessons. So one thing Hong Xiuquan thought is he said, you know, we're Christians. The West is Christian. Maybe we could be allies with them. And he tried to ally. But what happened is Christian missionaries and others would come into his kingdom and say, oh, this is great. You guys are Christian, we're Christian. And then they would see things like bodies hanging on the walls. And they would realize, ooh, this is not exactly the same type of Christianity that we have. Or they would, talk about Jesus, and Hong Xiuquan might mention, oh yeah, he's my older brother. That's a little weird. It was not the same type of Christianity that the West had. It was a sort of a corruption of Christianity in a way. So as I said, helped by the Second Opium War, the reason that the Qing had such a hard time is because they were weakened by fighting foreigners. So the Taiping Rebellion lasted a long time and got bigger and bigger. This is sort of interesting. Right here you can see this is the Porcelain Tower. The Porcelain Tower is a sort of a landmark. It was considered one of the wonders of the world before it was destroyed, and it was in Nanking. So if you think of Nanking before this time, everybody always draws the Porcelain Tower. It's really an interesting landmark. And it became sort of a symbol of the Taiping. So on those image analysis type questions, if you see this Porcelain Tower, you can say this image is probably in Nanking, and it's probably during the Taiping Rebellion. Sadly, it was destroyed once the Qing finally managed to retake Nanking. One of the first things Hong Xiuquan did is said, blow that tower up because the Qing might use it to put cannons in there and fire on our city. So it's really sad that they dynamited that tower and destroyed it. Just sort of an interesting landmark. So the Taiping did not last forever. It only lasted for about 14 years. And you can see in the picture below, these are Manchu soldiers. This is actually one of the earliest photos ever taken in China. Photography, of course, is brand new. There are some early photographs in Japan that we just looked at in the last unit. But anyway, the big problem is, as you can maybe guess already, Hong Xiuquan and his generals were very corrupt. They broke their own rules. They fought with each other. I think the power went to their head. But one of the things, for example, Hong Xiuquan's, one of his generals was a man named Yang, and Yang claimed that he could speak with the voice of God, and a lot of people followed Yang. And eventually they had an argument. You know, God is a higher power than Jesus, so if he can speak with God's voice, and Hong Xichuan is just Jesus' little brother, so there's big fights between them. They also had lots and lots of women in harems, concubines, while everybody else was gender segregated. And Hong Xichuan had a huge golden throne while everybody else was sharing their wealth. So they were sort of, they were very, very corrupt. They kept expanding and taking over cities, and really the turning point of the entire Taiping Rebellion is when they tried to take over Shanghai. Shanghai would have been the logical next city to take, but they forgot to account that there are foreigners in Shanghai. It's one of the 5 treaty ports of the Treaty of Nanking, and there are Brits there. And the Brits had modern weapons and guns and the support of the British Empire. So as soon as the Taiping tried to take over Shanghai, the people of Shanghai fought back with support of the Brits, and the Brits sort of started helping the Qing government suppress this revolt. So that was really a turning point. They failed, and then from Shanghai, foreigners and Qing start pushing them back, and it's downhill from there. Now at the last moment, all the cities are taken back from the Taiping, back to the Qing, except for Nanking. The forces are surrounding Nanking, and Hong Xichuan makes his final message after blowing up the porcelain tower. He says, I had a vision. God is going to save us. There's going to be a miracle tomorrow, and we are not going to be taken over by the Qing. We are going to win. In the morning, everybody wakes up and goes to Hong Xichuan, and he's dead. He had died of food poisoning. Some people maybe said he was actually poisoned. Other people say he just had to eat bad food because they were surrounded in a siege and there really wasn't much food left in the city. But anyway, Hong Xichuan dies, and the Qing march in. And when the Qing did march in, they took over Taiping. They said, this isn't even a secret, they killed every man, woman, and child that they found in the city because they wanted to stamp out this idea for good and get rid of it. So just an incredibly deadly war. All told, at the very end, 20 to 30 million people had died. This is not an exaggeration. This is probably actually a little lower than the reality because it was difficult for them to count all the bodies that had died, or the people who had died. Hugely devastating. Third most casualties of any conflict in human history, if you look up on Wikipedia, and the highest for a civil war. In contrast, the American Civil War, I think it was something like 800,000 or something like that, not even close. Anyway, total war had destroyed lots of crops, homes, etc. The whole place was just devastated. China was flattened, especially southern China. And people, what little respect they had for the Qing in China was gone. They realized that the Qing were weak, that a crazy guy with a crazy idea could take over half of China or a quarter of China from the Qing, that they were only really being propped up by the foreigners. So more rebellions popped up and people lost faith in their government. Again, China's humiliated. Around the world, people look at this and say, wow, China is so weak. They are so poor. They're so chaotic. And finally, the worst thing is that the Western powers had to help again and again. You'll see that the Western powers like Great Britain and France, they actually helped the Qing keep control. Now, it's not like they're really good friends with the Qing, but they know that the Qing are giving them money. They have signed the Treaty of Nanking with the Qing. They're going to keep the Qing in power just because they know that those are people who will pay them. The Taiping, who knows what they would do? Maybe they wouldn't honor those old treaties. Who knows what's going on? So really bad for China, really bad for the Qing. So overall, in general, this is a really sad story, really deadly. It starts with China being weakened by the Opium Wars and the Treaty of Nanking, and it ends with China being even weaker, even more humiliated, but the Qing are still in power. Thank you very much for listening. Have a good day.